we want to welcome our viewers to this very special program. It's the first edition of the Environmental Protection Agency's monthly feature of a program called The Environment Matters. On this program, we aim to be very informative. We aim to feature the work of the agency through our different departmental programs, through our individual staff, and through the various activities and events that are coordinated by the agency. My name is Karen Watson, Senior Environmental Officer with the EPA. This program will be aired monthly and rebroadcasted 3 times within that month, right here on the NCN. So we hope you tune in. For this month, we want to feature 2 very distinguished professionals in the environmental field. Dr. Vincent Adams, he is the current Executive Director of the Environmental Protection Agency, and Dr. Patrick Williams, who is the Chairman of the EPA's Board of Directors. Welcome, gentlemen. So we want to have a conversation about the EPA. The EPA has been established for over 20 years. Dr. Adams, you have been recently appointed to the post of Executive Director. Can you just give us some insight into your background, professional, academic, whatever you want to tell us?
Thanks, Karen. It's really a pleasure to be here, and of course, I've been on board for 2 months now. It looks like 2 years already, because obviously, we've all have had our hands full in moving forward. And this year, I just want to say, you folks deserve lots of compliments for this initiative, in terms of getting the word out there as to what does the EPA do, and what value we bring to the taxpayers of this country. But anyway, I'm a Linden boy. As a matter of fact, if you're from Linden, there's Linden, and then there's Mackenzie, Christiansburg, and Wismar. Yes. And I'm from the Christiansburg side of the river. Grew up in the alleys of Christiansburg as a young kid, and eventually ended up I went to the Mackenzie High School, and then on to the University of Guyana. And I'm proud to know that I was in the first class of engineering graduates from the University of Guyana. But growing up in Linden also, I was the first Lindener to play cricket for Guyana, in both the youth series and on the national cricket team. And then unfortunately, I had an accident. Just breaking into the Guyana team, I had an accident that kind of sidelined me for a while. And matter of fact, that's what prompted me to go to university and academics. Yes. But everything turned out to be fine. So now I'm here. I went to the United States, where I've spent the last 40 plus years working for one of the major oil companies, and then went over to the United States Department of Energy, which is a federal agency working for the U.S. government. Again, this young kid from Christiansburg, I rose to the highest level that any civilian can get to within the U.S. government. So I was what was called a senior executive service employee, and we ran the day-to-day operations of the nation's business. I worked for the department for the last 30 years. In the last 10, I was in that position of being one of those senior executive service employees, working in running nuclear weapons complexes, decommissioning and cleaning up, and building new technologies, etc. So upon retirement, I was asked to come back, thanks to the chairman of the board and others who asked me to come back and help, be part of basically developing and running the Environmental Protection Agency. So I'm glad. But in the meantime, even when I was in Guyana, as many may know, I was coming back every year to give back to Guyana, especially in Linden. I headed what is called one of the hometown associations, the Linden Fund, the Linden Fund USA. So every year we would bring back medical missions, education missions. We still do education workshop on medical missions. We even sent I think it was like 8 students to the University of Guyana.
Okay.
So that organization is still up and running, and I, was even advising the past and present government in the areas of energy and the environment. So I'm glad to be back permanently, and and hopefully I'll get involved in other things. Before this, we came in here, of course, we were talking about, for old time's sake, a lot about cricket, and tonight, by the way, the public is invited. I think I'm going to be the keynote speaker at the Demerara Cricket Club in Queenstown, annual award presentation function. Before I left the country, I was also captain of the Demerara Cricket Club. So I'm glad to be back in many, many different ways, in addition to helping the chairman and the rest of the folks and yourself, make the agency the best agency in the country.
Yes, so we're happy to have you here with the wealth of knowledge and experience you bring to the EPA and further to Guyana. But how has your experiences prepared you? I know you have been coming to Guyana. You have been playing a role in the development of Guyana over the years, although you've been out of Guyana. But how has your experiences in your field overseas prepared you for this post that you are currently occupying?
Well, quite a bit. Of course, the world has changed quite a bit since I left, and I was really, I'm probably the luckiest person on the planet to accomplish what I've accomplished. Probably only 90%. 10%. I'll give 10% of the credit to myself. 90% of the people who made it happen, like my parents, my teachers, and everybody else who held my hands and that's the reason why I come back. I think it's my turn to give back. But nevertheless, it's really gave me an opportunity, especially to rise to the ranks that I rose to in the United States government. I had the opportunity of working internationally. As a matter of fact, I led several international organizations, professional organizations. I led conferences, so I was exposed to that international environment and to understand what a competitive environment is. You see, we've grown up here in the United States. We're not in the United States. I always get mixed up as to where I'm sitting. Whether I'm in the U.S. or whether I'm in Guyana. But nevertheless, we in Guyana, and it's not a criticism, but since I was a kid, and probably it's still the same, but I think with the coming of oil and everything else, and private investment is probably going to change. But we've grown up in this culture of working for the government. And when you work for the government, you do not inculcate that competitive spirit and what a world free market economy is. So that has exposed me very, very much so, working for the government. As a matter of fact, we used to have, as senior executives in my position, we had to spend 2 weeks every 6 months at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, probably the best business school in the world. And we used to sit there for 2 weeks with the top CEOs and the chairman and presidents of all the major corporations, the Exxons of the world. And we used to sit there for 2 weeks with them and to figure out exactly what the rest of the world is doing. So that the United States can know, we can pick the good things that they're doing, the other countries, like the Asia, we used to call them the Asian miracles, the Singapore and the Chinas, and then what are they doing that we're supposed to be doing, we meaning the United States. So we would go there and we would come back with lessons learned, good and bad. And the only reason we did that, I didn't go there because, I'm an engineer, PhD engineer, and I was the, scientist. I went there to provide leadership to the nation in terms of what do we need to do to remain competitive. So because of that leadership experience and managerial experience and understanding what it takes to make a nation competitive, there were 2 specific experiences I had in that same regard. A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I think, even the U.S. government had recognized that, we were not the government wasn't operating as like it should be to remain competitive. So they decided they will outsource government jobs.
Okay.
So they said, well, okay, you know, we think we can outsource it to private corporations, what you folks are doing. Of course, there's some roles and responsibilities that are inherently governmental that you can't outsource. But the rest of it, so the government came out with this brilliant idea. They were going to outsource government jobs. So every agency now had to justify why they should not be outsourced, why they should keep operating as so they had to submit this new plan to show that they're going to be competitive, and they were compared to what it would, how if they, you know, in terms of reorganization, restructuring, changing up their business model, they had to prove to the White House and to Congress that they're going to operate more competitively than if jobs are outsourced. And it so happened at the same time I was being trained to become a senior executive, so we had to do two assignments with two outside agencies outside. And guess what? So I was kind of the guinea pig, if you will. So one agency asked me to come up with their plan. It was, matter of fact, it was the Environmental Protection Agency. How do they restructure? And so I was there for 4 months. I came up with a plan. It was called a high performing organization. So I had to restructure that organization, and then they submitted it, of course, to the White House, and then they saw that the White House accepted it. So another agency asked me to do the same thing for them because of that success. So I built the organization from scratch. As a matter of fact, that's been one of my accomplishments. You know, so people call upon me anytime there's something that needs fixing. You know, I'll be called upon to get it done. So I bring all of that experience here, and hopefully and that's why I was asked. I remember the very first day I was asked the question, what is my vision for the agency, and without question I said it's to make it the best agency in government, to make it a model agency for other agencies to follow.
Definitely, and we look forward to that leadership to propel us into the future and to make us the best agency indeed. We're shifting across to a gentleman who's no stranger to many of us, maybe to a few, Dr. Patrick Williams. Can you give us some background?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I must say that in terms of what the executive director has accomplished and his experiences, I am nowhere close to that. But let me just say that I've been around for a while, and I've done a few things. My academic career really started at the University of Guyana, and I was in a different field. I started in the Department of Geography, but I liked the department because I was under the tutelage of Professor Cummins, who was a distinguished professor at the time. And he really inspired me into that field of study. So having left the University of Guyana as a graduate from the Department of Geography, I did postgraduate studies at the University of Reading in the UK. And then from Reading, I went on to do a PhD at University of Nottingham. So I came back and I went to the University of Guyana, and I served there for a number of years as head of department, as dean of a faculty, as director of a unit. And shortly after that, I went and did a short stint at the United Nations Development Program as a program officer for the Amazonian Biodiversity Project. I worked there for almost 2 years. I then went back to the university and spent a short time. And then I went to work with the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. I worked there as the country manager for about 15 years. At the World Wildlife Fund, my career as an environmentalist really took off because we did a lot of practical things, a lot of research work, and we interacted with a lot of environmental organizations nationally and internationally. I also, while I was at the World Wildlife Fund, I also had the opportunity to do postdoctoral studies at the WWF College in the Netherlands. And so I acquired some very unique skills going to the college, things like fundraising. I was able to also look at issues relating to conflict resolution and so on. These were some of the key issues. Communication was also an important aspect of it. But having said all of that, let me also say that in terms of environment, I've been around in the environment field for quite a while, because even while I was at the university, I served on several boards of directorship. For example, I was a member of the board of director at the Geology and Mines Commission. I served as a member of the board of directors of the Kaishore National Park. I served as a member of the board of director of the National Trust of Guyana. So I have some experience in terms of being on boards and know how they operate and so on. In another area of public service, I also served as chief examiner for the Caribbean Examination Council for a number of years. And that was very important for me because I assisted in shaping the syllabus and to also set standards in marking and so on at the Caribbean level examination. So I found that to be very important. I've now been at the EPA for just about 2 years, and I think it's a challenging job, but it's one that I've enjoyed. And the beauty of being there as the chair is that I have an opportunity to interact once again with many of the persons who went through university under my tutorship. So a lot of the heads and so on, I taught them at university. And it served as an inspiration for me, and it allowed me to say, well, look, I have an opportunity to help these people to mold them into the kind of persons we want to let us get an EPA of world class. So I've been working with them. Before Vincent arrived, I discovered that there were many problems with the EPA. Morale was low, and that was because benefits were not there for the people. And I think over the last 2 years, we've accomplished a lot. I'll give you an example. One of the things that troubled me when I got there was that I found people were going into the fields, they had no insurance coverage, for example. And I asked the question, if we're sending people's children, wives, and husbands into the field, and something happens to them, who's going to look after them? We have no insurance coverage or anything. So I thought that should end immediately. So we put a stop to that, and we took steps to ensure that we have group insurance to cover people and so on. And we looked at salaries and other benefits. And I think we're in a better place now, and I'm going to continue to work with the executive director to improve not only benefits for the staff, but also the standards to take EPA to a level where we think it should be, so that it could be compared with similar types of organizations in the world.
Yeah, indeed. So competent, and you have the skills to move us forward as an agency. Dr. Patrick Williams, when we think of the EPA, more so we think of the US EPA and its establishment, its creation. We reflect on that book that was written by Rachel Carson, The Silent Spring.
Yes.
Where, she alerted the public to the detrimental effects of pesticide use on the environment, and in addition to all the public outcries, eventually led to the establishment of the EPA, US EPA, in the 1970s. I wonder what's the case for Guyana. What was the driving force behind the establishment, the creation of the EPA in Guyana?
Yes,
Why is an EPA necessary?
Right. I could talk a bit about that, because I need to go back to, for example, the 1980s, 90s. There was a report that was prepared by a Swedish person, Brundtland Haarlem. It's called the Brundtland Report, the World Commission on Environment and Development. And that report was instrumental in setting the scene globally for the environmental movement. That report showed that the rate at which the global community was utilizing resources was not sustainable. So they talked about that, and they also talked about the rate at which we were polluting our environment and all kinds of things. And that report showed that we had to do something about it. So an outgrowth of that report was the 1992 Rio Conference. Right? That 1992 conference was a landmark event because it was a global event where countries from all around the world attended that conference to talk about what the problems were, environmental problems were, and how the nations could work together to address these problems. Guyana was a participant in that conference in 1992. Now, at that conference, there were three main things that came out of it. We had the three UNCBD, UNCCF, and UNCCD conventions. There were three main conventions that came out of that. One focused on climate change, one focused on biodiversity, and one focused on desertification and what should be done to combat this. Those were the mainstay results of that conference. Now, Guyana was a signatory to that conference. At that conference also, some of the richer nations had promised to assist some of the developing countries in establishing legal and institutional framework so that they could address some of the environmental issues. Guyana was one of the beneficiaries as a signatory.
Okay.
And so when our leaders came back, they immediately started working towards the establishment of our EPA. I think the other event that gave impetus to the establishment of our EPA and made us really realize that we needed to do something was the Omai cyanide spill. It happened around the same time, and we recognized the danger that faced our country if we continued to operate without a regulatory body and want to oversee the way we use our environment. So those events, all taken together, gave us the momentum towards the establishment of the EPA. Now, the EPA was established in 1996, right? And that act of Parliament that gave us the EPA set out the rules of operation for the EPA. It identified the roles and functions that the agency should perform. It also identified the management structure of the agency.
Okay.
So I could tell you, for example, the schedule in the Act outlined that there should be a board of directors, there should be an executive director, there should be a trust fund. Those were the key things. But it also outlined the roles and functions of the executive director. For example, the executive director, for instance, was the day-to-day operational manager for the EPA. He had the power to hire staff, and he was supposed to be giving guidance to policymakers and so on. The board, on the other hand, was responsible for overall policies, the overarching policies, and to give guidance also to the executive director. So that was the framework. In terms of the specific roles and functions of the EPA, they talked, for example, about its overall role in the management of the environment. It talked about, for instance, guiding decision makers on policy. It talked about being able to monitor operations of companies and other bodies that were dealing with environmental and resource use issues. It talked about, for example, setting standards in terms of how companies should operate within certain framework. It was able to set guidelines. It's supposed to set guidelines for the operation of companies. So there were a host of things listed in there that the EPA could do. And a lot of those would be under the guidance of the executive director and his staff, and the board was supposed to just oversee and monitor to make sure that they operate within that framework. So in a nutshell, that's the kind of thing that has been happening.
Definitely. You would have already delved into my other question, which I'm happy about. The EPA has several pieces of legal instruments.
Yes.
And of course, we have the EPA Act and its subsidiary regulations that makes it operable.
Right.
The noise, the hazardous waste, air quality, water quality,
That's right.
and all of these regulations.
Which we could call collectively the policy instruments.
Okay, yes.
Right?
Policy instruments.
Those are the things that give teeth to the regulation, the EPA Act.
Yes. So, Dr. Adams, I know the public, we normally receive a lot of complaints. And of course, we normally hear it also in the media. The EPA is not doing enough. Persons have misconceptions about what exactly the EPA should be doing. You know, something that we should be looking at garbage, picking up garbage at the operational stage. What exactly is the mandate of the EPA operating under these legal instruments? What exactly should be our focus?
Well, Karen, it's always a challenge, and of course, I've been on both sides. I've worked for, like I said, in the oil industry, for example, work in the private industry, and I work for the government. Not besides, having a stint here with the Environment Protection Agency, I was doing environmental work with the Department of Energy. But environmental work is never like producing oil. Everybody hears about so environmental oversight as a regulatory agency. It's not as the sexy thing as producing oil. People are so it's always a challenge to convince people or convince the public and the taxpayers that you're adding value. Now, and that's why we are here. As you know, we are taking this very, very seriously in terms of going out there and communicating to the public what exactly do we do. We're sitting there and people, when I came to the agency, for example, I heard my staff, by the way, I think that was an excellent background from Dr. Williams as to how the EPA here evolved, but it's kind of discouraging sometimes, or well, not discouraging, because I don't think that anything is going to discourage me from getting to where we ought to be. But when you hear that the staff themselves are saying, they believe that, we're like a toothless tiger. We are supposed to be a tiger in terms of making sure our mandate, coming out of the act, etc., our mandate is to make sure that the public and the nation have, basically, it's very simple, clean water to drink and to use, breathe fresh air, and clean soil and the rest of the environment. That's our mandate in very, very basic terms. Of course, we have the regulations that specifically tell us what the standards ought to be for each of those media and etc. And we need to make sure, as an agency, we need to make sure that those laws and regulations are complied with. And that is why the staff feels that we are toothless tiger, because apparently we are not doing our jobs. As you know, I asked for, when I just arrived, I asked for a status on every single permit. And even I was really shocked. I expected it to be kind of not too good based on what I hear the staff was telling. We had, as you know, we have over 600 out of compliance activities. These are permits that expire, permits that operations where there are no permits. We only, just to compare it, we have 400 plus permits that are not out of compliance. So that's the kind of thing we cannot allow, because when we do that, we're putting the public in danger. We're not satisfying our mandate. So that's a very high priority of mine in terms of other things, building the agency, etc. But at the same time, work goes on. We've got to satisfy that mandate of protecting the people. We get 10 complaints every single day, whether it's noise, whether it's somebody setting up some kind of a rogue operation someplace, interfering with the neighbor, they can't breathe, I mean, we get like 10 complaints every single day, and guess what? Our folks have to go out there. Those are the kinds of things that people are not seeing. But we've got the other thing that really, which was really a very pleasant surprise, we've got some highly qualified folks on staff, and they are very, very hard workers, and they want to go get their jobs done, but we have got to give them the tools. And while we are building the organization, etc., we've got to take care of the day-to-day business, like fixing those 600 permits. And I'm sure that, as a matter of fact, I was coming on a plane last night, and a businessman was sitting next to me, and he said, well, I read in the newspaper that you're giving the mining company a rough time. I said, no, I'm just carrying out, doing my job. And he said, well, they say that you're interfering with business. I'm probably, I came from where I came from, I came from the United States is one of the most business-oriented countries. So I've worked in that environment. And it's a myth to think that, you can't have good business, a strong economy, while at the same time you have strong implementation of, and adherence to environmental. As a matter of fact, it costs the country as a whole more when you do not have good environmental compliance, because people get sick. Somebody is paying for it. You know, you get ill, the medical cost and you know, care. It's going to cost you more. It's going to cost the company more.
Correct.
So it's a myth to say that you can't have both together. Now, for let's say for those 600 plus operations out there, I'm sure there are many more. It is not our intention to go shut down business. As you know, what my direction is to go look at those that are really high hazards and work with them and see if we can fix it and work with them to come into compliance. Give them a certain time to come into compliance. We're not there to shut down businesses. Now, I'm sure that there might be a few where they're definitely harming people's health, and they're not going to be allowed to operate if they're of imminent danger. But we're not going to go there. You know, we're going to work with folks to make sure that they come into compliance with the law. So, you know, and I just want to dispel that myth that somehow, you know, we cannot have, you know, a strong economy while at the same time having strong implementation of. As a matter of fact, I think the two work together for the benefit of the nation. It's more, you know, it makes more economic sense.
Yes, indeed. Persons would have, the general public would have heard you mention permits. Persons require permits. Businesses require permits. Why do the businessman require a permit? What's their obligation?
Right.
To the environment?
Yes.
If you're developing an activity, you know, an operation that has the potential to impact the environment, why do you?
And it's no different. And the environment, you know, I normally like to talk about the environment as the environmental health and safety. They all come together. You know, you can't separate the three. It's no different as you being required to have a driver's license. And the reason why you're having a driver's license is not really to protect you per se. It's really to protect the public. Because if you can't drive, you're going to go get into an accident. Who knows what's going to happen? So it's to make sure that, again, we maintain good water, clean air, etc. So somebody who's going to be doing some type of operation, you've got to make sure that you're not just operating irresponsibly, that they really don't care what happens to or how they're impacting the environment, you know, your health, etc. So that's the reason why you have to have a permit, so that, and we, the regulatory agents, have to make sure that there are certain standards. The air you breathe has to be of a certain level, so that, you know, in terms of contaminants, can't get up. Well, nothing is going to be 100% pure. But those are the risks we take. You know, when you drive a car, for example, you know, there's a risk that you're going to get into an accident. But you know, there's that risk you take for driving that vehicle. Even the vehicle emit pollutants in the air. But we've got to make sure that the air is not overly contaminated to impact the health. So that's the reason why you have to have these permits. But it's our obligation to make sure that the law is followed, but it's also the operators' obligation. If they want to be responsible citizens of this country, they've got to follow the law. And our job is no different to the cop who's sitting out there. Somebody, you know, you're driving a vehicle too fast, or you don't have, you know, your vehicle is not in a right working condition to cause a hazard to anybody. So that's what we are there for, is to make sure that whatever operations are out there, they're operating within the regulatory compliance and within the health standards. And it's no different here than any part of the world.
Right. Let me just add this thing as well. There is an obligation on our side as well. When we issue a permit, we are in fact saying that we are maybe 80 or 90% certain that that particular business will operate in a way that will observe the environmental standards and so on that we have set ourselves.
Yep.
If we don't have that kind of assurance, then we ought not to issue the permit.
Yep.
So that's when a business shows its permit, say, well, look, I've got a permit from the EPA. That person is saying, they have checked me out, and they can guarantee now that I am operating within the parameters that the EPA has set. So that's important.
And even what's even the piece that I would like to add to that too is that a lot of we're not just paper tigers either. When we issue that permit, our work is not finished. We've got to go inspect routinely to make sure that they're complying with those permits. So our work is continuous. You know, we've got here in Guyana, it's probably more challenging than I've ever experienced in terms of the logistics of getting to the field. We've got mining that is way out. You gotta fly in, or you gotta drive vehicles, and right now we're hurting to get, you know, vehicles that are reliable, that you can get out there, way out in the hinterland. But you got to get out there. You fly, it's expensive, and you can't go there too often, of course. But then you still get complaints from residents who saying the rivers are polluted. I get that all the time. But our folks, they're doing a tremendous job. But we've got to keep on top. It's not just issuing the permit. When we issue that permit, we've got to make sure that they're in compliance with the permit, and they do not really exceed. And it's just a check to make sure that they're operating within the ambits of what they've signed up to.
Okay, so just to bring some further clarity to the public, the EPA issues a permit, otherwise known as an environmental authorization, once your business has the potential to pose an impact to the air, to the soil, to the water quality. So you're required to come in, apply with us. We conduct an assessment of your operation, right? We issue you with conditions that you would have to operate within the ambits of, to ensure that you're following environmental safeguards, you're protecting the environment, and you're practicing sound environmental practices. Guyana, we are at a juncture. We are at a juncture of economic transformation due to our oil and gas discoveries. We know with this discovery comes the potential. We know the risk involved in oil and gas operations. For the EPA, what's your vision for aligning the EPA given this new developmental trust, while also promoting the government's green economy agenda?
Yes.
What are some actions?
Yes, and that's the $1 million challenge. And not only for the EPA, by the way, because this was a godsend to this nation, and it suddenly happened, right? And it suddenly happened to a country that does not have that resources and capability. I'm sure you're hearing all that every single day. You know, it's building, you know, the capabilities to really handle this. You know, we're getting help from all the countries across the world, etc. But we just cannot sit on our laurels and wait for things to happen. And I think this government is going out there very aggressively. As you know, they set up the Department of Energy under Dr. Bino. And the good thing, Dr. Bino and I are working very, very closely. As a matter of fact, we've committed to each other that whatever, you know, we're going to be working we're going to be meeting and talking to each other very, very regularly, which is what we've been doing. So we're both in sync with what he's doing and how we're going to be overseeing it, etc. But we've got to be prepared. In our particular case, obviously, we are not there. We're working towards getting there. I've talked to every single oil company so far since I've been here in the last couple of months, and even they have, and they have also committed to making sure that we get the help in terms of building capacity, providing training, providing on-site, for our folks to go visit the rigs, get prepared before 2020. I myself, I didn't mention this to you earlier in your first question, but I myself am attached to the University of Guyana. I was doing that before I took this job, and I've been given a title, Distinguished Engineer in Resident at the university again. And one of my major participation is revamping the entire engineering department, and a major task is to set up a petroleum engineering department, and we're hoping to get that started in January. Again, it's part of that building of capacity. The Minister of Business is working on that building of capacity. I've noticed it almost every day. He's talking about it, working with Dr. Bino, etc. So we're getting ready, but don't let us forget the other stuff that is happening. Mining is a major part of our, I know most people are focused on oil and gas, but mining is also a major issue, as we all know. I mean, I've seen some of the videos in terms of, you know, what's happening in the mining industry. But we also have to have the capacity. And I've got to admit, you know, when I look at our staff, and again, we weren't prepared for it, not only in our department, but even the Department of Energy, they do not, you know, we've got to find capable folks. On our staff, we do not have a single petroleum engineer. We do not have, as far as I know, a single geologist, a single mining engineer. And those are the kinds of things that I've got to, you know, that I'm preparing right now in terms of restructuring the organization to come back to the board and Dr. Williams and say, here, this here is absolutely necessary. And I can tell you one thing, the one thing that really keeps me going every single day and gives me vigor and energy when I wake up in the morning is to know that Dr. Williams, for sure, and the board is more than 100% behind me, and Minister Harmon, by the way, because I've had several conversations, and they're all, everything that I've proposed to them, you know, as long as it's reasonable, they're in full support of me. So I think I'm encouraged. And I'm not going to give up on this agency. Oh, by the way, the Mexican government, for example, they we have one of our employees. She's been there for 3 weeks now, 2 to 3 weeks now. She's been there, actually on their rigs and offshore on their rigs. And this is the Mexican government, which is an agency which is similar to ours that was set up for that 4 years ago. So they're miles ahead of us, but they are today where we want to be 4 years from now, because they were where we are today just 4 years ago, and so we want to establish you know, to become like them or even better than them. We're going to be doing an assessment, working with the World Bank. The World Bank is, you know, Dr. Bino and I, we just recommended somebody to the World Bank to come in and do an assessment as to the same type of assessment that we're doing here as to what we need to build capacity. They're going to be coming in to look at that, to do an assessment for us to work on that capacity as we move forward and get prepared for all. But we will be ready. And the other thing is, we may be deficient right now in oil and gas regulations, etc. But there are regulations out there internationally. So I don't think anybody, the public, ought to be worried that somehow, you know, because we're new to the game. Our companies already know that if we do not have regulations here, we're going to use some of the most stringent that is being applied to abroad. Now, the other thing that happens in the environmental world, and every single barrel of oil that is produced, people don't think about the environmental part. It has an environmental component to it. Every single ounce of gold that is produced has an environmental there's an environmental cost. So for every barrel of oil that you produce, there's some fraction of it. To produce that oil, that you had to implement the environmental laws and regulations. Because if you had no control, who knows what can happen? You can probably have another BP horizon. You can have, you know, this spill in an RC that, you know, killed 160-something people. So you have to have those environmental health and safety controls. So that is why it's so important, which means that, and the oil companies understand that. And that's why we charge them like permit fees, etc., because even they have an environmental department, health and safety department. So they know there's a certain amount that goes in to produce. So the environmental part, even though you don't see it, but it's part of producing that oil, because if you don't have it, you will never produce a barrel of oil. So it's really important, and that's the way that people ought to be looking at it. The importance of it. Without it, you cannot produce any oil. It's got to be safe. Or else, if something happens, everything is shut down, and everything is polluted. The water, the fish, people's living is impacted. So you've got to have those environmental health and safety controls, and that's why the EPA is so important.
One of the things I want to mention, and it's an idea that I've been thinking about, and this is, we need to recognize that with resource exploitation, there is some level of environmental damage that takes place. And so from the revenues that we generate from the use of these resources, we should at least theoretically assign some part of it for environmental protection, environmental rehabilitation, and so on. So for instance, if we're talking about mining, and mining damages the environment in terms of the landscapes and so on, we should, over the long run, set aside some funding, some of the revenues we generate from that, to help us to rehabilitate that area. It's not tenable that we should continue to leave the landscapes degraded all the time. So we need to start thinking about the future. How can we help to rehabilitate some of these areas with the revenues that we generate from them?
Sure.
So those are important things that we need to conceptually we need to start thinking about as well.
And by the way, Karen, I know you talk about oil. And I come also, I didn't mention this already, with a kind of a unique background in that, I've got background in both sectors. Okay. I've got 2 master's degrees. One is in geological engineering, geological and petroleum engineering, and a master's in groundwater hydrology, which means that's part of the whole environment. And my I've got 2 years of PhD coursework in petroleum and geological engineering, and my PhD is in environmental engineering. On top of my experience in both sectors, so I come with a kind of a unique background in understanding, oil, geological work with mining, and groundwater, and environmental engineering. So so I understand all 3 media: water, air, and geotechnical or soil type stuff, and energy and mining. So it's okay. So and my leadership, in the U.S. of course. So that's why I'm so excited about this altar, is to put everything together and to really do it in a way that would really, where I can see I'm making a difference, and especially if I have the support from the board and the minister responsible, which is Joe Harmon. I mean, that it makes things really exciting, and with a great staff too, who are excited and eager to work.
Even as you said that, I think last night I was looking at the budget review program, where Minister Joe Harmon, he was on, and of course he is our responsible minister. He's responsible for the EPA. And he did mention, in terms of financial allocations for the different bodies under his supervision, he mentioned the EPA, and he mentioned the need for us to strengthen our compliance and enforcement, and of course allocating the appropriate funds to get that done, because with all work, monies and resources are required to get work done. So the EPA is semi-autonomous. We govern ourselves to some degree, but not completely. And we are subsidiary to our government lead, which is the Department of the Environment. And we do not generate our own revenue. We're not self-sufficient in that regard financially. What can we do as an agency, to push us financially towards achieving some of our activities on our work plan, towards ultimately achieving our mandate, which is to protect the environment and to also increase compliance and enforcement, which is an important part of our mandate?
Well, I'm going to go first, and then I'm sure that you have to be on. Matter of fact, at the last board meeting, when was it, last month, that was a major topic of discussion. I had a discussion with the finance minister's office in putting the budget together a couple of weekends ago, and that was the question I was asked. You know, when are we gonna, you know, generate more revenues, etc. So the board has tasked me to go out there and come up with. So I've got a team of people working on it even as we speak. In terms of how do we come up with generating more revenues, and I've already given a hint to some of the companies that our companies, for example, that we will be. I mean, and you could correct me here, Chairman, if I'm correct, but we've had a rate structure. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. That was in place since when? It's many years ago. But it's still there, and so that's the first thing we're going to be looking at. And it's not to go and try to take advantage of it. And that's not what we're going to. We're going to try to do it in a very fair and equitable manner. Like I said, for every barrel of oil that's being produced, there has to be an environmental component costed. For every ounce of gold that is produced, for every, you know, when a gas station sells gas, you know, there's that, or else you cannot operate without it. The rest, you won't have any operations afterwards. Something's going to happen. So we're looking at that as to how to come up, and I've made a commitment probably at least to have something by the end of December to the board, and so that we can work. But we're working that even as we speak, because it's really important. And I think, well, the chairman can finish, because he had started talking about, you know, some revenues being put aside for, you know, for bringing the land back to its original state and that type of. So those are the kinds of things we're working. But I'm sure the chairman has some ideas about that too.
So even before you arrived, we had recognized the problem.
Yeah.
And we had started looking at it. So we have on our board of directors a very good economist.
Yeah.
And we gave her the task of reviewing those fees and so on, the fee structures for the EPA. And we looked at it, and we came up with some numbers because we saw the potential to generate a lot more income. Some of the fees have been very low, and you know, some of them are not even worth the paper they printed on. To give you an example, for certain types of applications, they charge $1,000 Ghana and so on. And it's not. So we've looked at it, and we've theoretically come up with some structures where we said, look, for local businesses, we're going to raise the fees, and for external businesses, we're going to raise the fees as well. But we will make sure that for local businesses, we don't take it out of the range to discourage our local entrepreneurs. So that's the principle on which we started to look at the structure. And Vincent came just at the right time when we didn't complete that work, but because it's still work in progress. So we've got all the documents and so on, which we are going to hand over to him, so that he could incorporate some of the work that we've done, and he could start from there and take it on from there. But we've got some foundation work done already, and I've introduced him to the economist who was doing the work for us, and I told her that, you know, she should collaborate with him and explain to him how we arrived at some of the things we've put up, so that he could build on that. But we are looking at it, and we see the potential, especially for oil and gas. We could earn a lot more than it. In fact, some external agencies, when they looked at the fee structure, they thought we were crazy to have those kinds of fees. Right, so we're looking at that.
Okay, thank you. In closing, it's important for the general public to know this is our first program. We're trying to bring the agency to the public in a more intimate manner. We're reaching you in your homes now. And it's important for us to send the message that we're not here to take bread out of anybody's mouth. We're not here to shut down any business. We're here to uphold environmental safeguards, because it's important for people to know that they're not abstract from the environment. They make up the biological environment, and what affects the physical environment affects the human environment. So they have an important role to play, you know, in sound environmental practices and ensuring that your environment is protected, or water quality and so forth. So in closing, what's your message to the public from an EPA standpoint?
Right, so let me just say a few words on that very quickly. I think the public should see us as partners with them. In other words, we work together as partners. that we are working in their interest and we are working to protect the interests of the nation as a whole. They should be an integral part of it. We also have an obligation to the public at large as well as our investors. One of the things that I looked at also when I got there was the long delays in allowing environmental permits to go through. If we want, as the EPA, for the public to have confidence in us, we must be able to discharge our responsibilities in a very efficient and effective manner. And I said it over and over to some of the staff, we cannot get people applying for permits and we have them running on for months and months and months to over a year without letting them know what is happening. That's not going to build confidence with us and the public. And so my thing about the public and to the staff at the EPA is that we need to understand that we are partners in this and we need to work so that we can enhance each other's programs and benefits.
I would even go one step, and I further than that, and say not only partnership with the public, is partnering with business. And I've made it very clear to every businessman that I've talked to, we have a common interest. And it's not a matter of the company or the EPA, it's what's best for the nation.
Right.
And we're the biggest advocate of business. We'd be stupid if we're not. So we, like for example, these 600 permits that are out of compliance, we're not just going to go, we're going to work with them to make sure that they come into compliance. So we're the biggest, so we're going to work in partnership with business to make sure that we satisfy, the mandate of what the people to keep the nation as a healthy nation. Because like I said before, business and protecting the environment comes hand in hand. And it makes more economic sense to have a healthy environment, because then people wouldn't get sick more often. It's either you pay me now or you pay me later. Because if you don't protect the environment, then people are going to get, somebody's going to be paying for it someplace. I don't know, So it's been proven. As a matter of fact, there's data to show that the two comes hand in hand. So it's a myth to say that you can't have the two together.
Okay. All right. We want to thank our guests for being on the program for this month. We want to assure the public that we'll be here monthly. Just for you to note again that this program will be aired monthly and it will be rebroadcasted. So if you missed it this time, you have 3 more times to view it. So we want to thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you once again next month.